His name was Walter. He was 82, but there was something in the way he carried himself that made you forget his age. A Vietnam veteran, once a young soldier in boots too big for his feet, now walked with silver-handled cane, not out of weakness, but with quiet dignity. His back had curved slightly over the years, and his hands were the tremble of time, yet his presence remained steady, like the ticking of an old, reliable clock. Every morning at exactly 7 a.m., Walter made his way to Rosie's diner. Rain, snow, summer heat, it didn't matter. He lived just 4 blocks away, and unless the weather was truly impossible, he walked. It wasn't about the exercise or the coffee. It was about rhythm, familiarity, that small comfort of a place that never changed, where people still held the door open, and the waitress knew your name without looking. He always sat at the same booth, second from the window. Not too sunny, not too dim. Just enough light to read the small print headlines in his folded-up newspaper. He ordered the same thing every single time. 1 black coffee, no sugar, no cream. Not because he was picky, but because he didn't like fuss. Walter had lived through enough chaos to understand the peace in simple things. Rosie's diner wasn't anything fancy. Vinyl booths, squeaky floors, old jazz humming from a dusty speaker near the pie display. But to Walter, it was perfect. It was steady, and in a world that moved too fast, he found peace in his predictability. Most of the regulars knew who he was. Some would smile when they passed by his booth. A few offered small talk, short nods, respectful silence. But Jenny, the morning waitress, was different. She was in her 40s, raising 2 kids alone, always in a hurry, but she never failed to refill Walter's cup before he even noticed it was low. She never called him sir or mister, just Walter, and he liked that. It made him feel like he still belonged to the world. Walter didn't talk much about the war. If someone asked, he'd shrug and say, "It was a long time ago." But every now and then, when the diner was quiet and the world outside still waking up, you could see him drift, eyes softening, fixed on a memory that only he could see. That morning, though, something felt off. Not to Walter. He did what he always did. He walked in at 7:02, nodded to the man behind the counter, and took his seat. Jenny greeted him with a smile and poured his coffee without a word, just like she always did. Outside, the street was still damp from last night's rain. Inside, the diner smelled of bacon grease and cinnamon toast. But in the corner, near the gumball machine, sat someone unfamiliar. A teenage boy, maybe 16, maybe younger. He wore a dark hoodie pulled halfway over his head. His sneakers were loud with neon green laces, and his phone never left his hand. Walter didn't notice him at first. Why would he? He wasn't the type to judge, and he had his crossword puzzle to focus on. But Jenny saw the kid. She watched him out of the corner of her eye as he fiddled with his phone, swiping, grinning, aiming the camera in different directions. It wasn't uncommon for young folks to wander into Rosie's, especially on school breaks. But something about this one didn't sit right. He wasn't ordering, wasn't talking, wasn't eating, just filming. The boy's gaze eventually locked onto Walter, and then he smiled, not the warm, friendly kind, but the smirk of someone who thought he knew better, someone who thought mocking others was entertainment. He adjusted the angle of his phone, turned on the front camera, and mouthed something Jenny couldn't quite hear. Walter remained unaware, quietly sipping his coffee, lost in a headline about city council elections. Then the boy stood. It was a small movement, casual to anyone not paying attention. He sauntered over, slow and deliberate, holding the phone at chest height, thumb hovering over the record button. Jenny took a step forward from behind the counter, unsure of what he was doing, but it happened too fast. With one swift motion, the boy swung his hand across the table, knocking Walter's coffee cup clean off. It hit the floor with a shattering crack, hot liquid spraying across Walter's trousers, staining the old linoleum. The entire diner froze. Walter didn't jump or shout. He blinked, looked down at the mess, and slowly reached for a napkin. The boy laughed, high-pitched unkind, and raised his phone. "Say hi to TikTok, old man," he said, before turning and jogging out the door like it was some kind of joke. Jenny stood in stunned silence. A man at the counter muttered a curse under his breath. A young couple near the window exchanged shocked glances. But Walter, he just sat there, calm as ever. He blotted the spill with steady hands and folded the napkin neatly beside the broken cup. There was no anger in his face, just quiet disappointment, like he had seen this kind of foolishness before, like he had lived through worse and refused to give it power. Jenny rushed over with a towel. "Walter, are you all right?" she asked, voice shaking. He nodded. "Nothing burns that hasn't burned before," he said gently. Outside, the boy had already vanished down the block, phone in hand, probably uploading the video with some clever caption. He thought he had pulled off a prank. He thought it was funny. He didn't know that sometimes one careless act can echo louder than expected. And what none of them realized, not the boy, not the customers, not even Jenny, was that this quiet morning would soon turn into something far greater than anyone could have imagined, because word travels fast in a town like theirs, especially when it's about a veteran, and especially when the brotherhood still runs deep. Walter had just taken his second sip of coffee when it happened. The warmth in his cup had barely settled in his chest, and he was tracing the morning crossword with a worn-down pencil stub when a shadow moved toward his table. It was the boy, the same teenager Jenny had been watching, the one with the slouched posture and the restless phone. He came with no greeting, no warning, no decency. Walter looked up just in time to see the smirk. Not one of friendliness or mischief, but something colder, performative. The kind of smile you wear when you think you're clever and untouchable. The boy stood beside the booth, holding his phone up as if the old man before him was just another background prop in a silly internet stunt. And then, without a word, he struck. His arm swept out in a single motion, careless yet intentional. The mug, Walter's mug, was knocked off the table. It hit the floor with a sharp crack, the sound splitting through the calm diner like a gunshot. Hot coffee splashed across Walter's slacks, dripping onto his shoes, puddling under the table legs. The newspaper he just unfolded curled at the edges, soaked. The ceramic cup, now in two pieces, rested against the faded floor tiles, steaming. For a moment, the entire diner was silent. Jenny, who had just emerged from the kitchen with 2 plates of scrambled eggs, froze mid-step. One of the plates slipped from her tray, landing on the floor with a dull thud. A couple by the far window stopped eating, forks suspended in midair. An older man in a Vietnam cap near the entrance stood, his hand tightening around his cane. And still, the boy stood there, laughing. Not nervous laughter, not even embarrassed. He laughed like he had pulled off a prank worthy of applause. He held up his phone, recording every second. He tilted the camera toward Walter and said with mocking cheer, "Say hi to TikTok, old man." Walter didn't move right away. He sat there, eyes lowered to the spilled coffee, the broken cup, the drenched fabric of his pants. His hands, marked with sunspots and calluses, reached slowly for a napkin. His expression remained calm. No outrage, no panic, just a stillness that came from living through far worse. Jenny rushed forward. "Walter, oh my God, are you burned? Are you all right?" Her voice trembled as she knelt to check his legs. Walter shook his head gently. "It's just coffee," he said, folding the wet napkin and dabbing at his trousers. The boy, satisfied with his footage, turned and jogged out the door. The bell above the entrance jingled lightly, far too cheerful for what had just happened. He didn't pay for anything. He didn't look back. People started murmuring, quiet at first, then louder. Who the hell does that to an old man? Is he okay? Was that a prank? Was he filming? Jenny helped Walter to his feet, but he waved her off softly. "I'm fine, honey. Let's not make a scene." But it was already too late for that. The video would go live in under a minute. The boy, somewhere out there, grinning into his phone, captioning it with something like, "Coffee attack on Gramps' face with tears of joy," or "Watched his vet lose it." He thought it was funny. He thought it was harmless. He had no idea what kind of ripple he had just started. Back inside the diner, the air was different now. There was an unspoken tension hanging over every table. Jenny walked back behind the counter, her jaw tight, hands shaking as she picked up the phone. She called her manager first. Then, on a second thought, she made another call to her cousin Paul, a former Marine who ran the local Veterans Outreach Center just 2 blocks away. She didn't need to say much. Just what had happened. Just that it was Walter. Paul was silent for a moment. Then he said, "I'm on my way." Walter sat back down, his pants still damp. Jenny brought him a fresh cup. He didn't touch it. He just stared out the window, eyes distant, lips pressed into a thin line. 5 minutes later, the bell above the door rang again. But this time, it wasn't a teenager. It was Paul, built like a truck and dressed in jeans and a black leather jacket. Paul didn't walk. He marched. Behind him came 2 more men, both former Army, both regulars at the Outreach Center. They weren't smiling. They weren't loud, but their presence filled the space. Paul approached Walter first. He crouched beside him like a son checking on his father. "Walt," he said, "you all right?" Walter gave a small nod. "It was just coffee," he repeated, voice calm. Paul looked over at Jenny. "He recorded it?" "Yeah," she said. "Posted it too, I think. I saw him swipe up just before he ran." Paul stood. "All right then." He didn't say anything else. Just walked outside, made a call on his phone, and waited. 10 minutes later, 3 trucks pulled up to the curb. Not police, not press, veterans. Some wore leather vests with patches. Others still had their dog tags on chains around their necks. One man wore his full Navy dress cap, even though it was Saturday. Another had the unmistakable boots of man who had marched through sand and snow alike. They came one by one, quiet, focused, deliberate. Some shook Walter's hand. Some simply stood outside, arms crossed, watching. The boy didn't return. But word would get back to him, because now it wasn't just Walter he had embarrassed. It was a man who had once stood shoulder to shoulder with brothers in arms. A man who had seen war, who had earned every wrinkle, every scar, every slow step. The kid thought he was filming a joke, but what he didn't understand was that there's a line. And when you cross that line with someone like Walter, you're not mocking a stranger. You're mocking service. Sacrifice. An entire generation that gave more than they got. By noon, Rosie's diner wasn't just a place to eat. It had become a quiet tribute. No signs, no speeches, just presence. A dozen men stood outside. Some leaned against cars. Some talked in low voices. Others said nothing. But they were there. For Walter. For what he represented. And the video? Oh, it spread. Not the way the boy had intended. People saw the clip and recoiled. Comments poured in. Disgusting. Where are his parents? You don't do that to a vet. The boy took it down within hours, but it was too late. Someone had already downloaded it, posted it again with Walter's name, with his story, with the truth. And when a reporter called Rosie's diner later that evening, Jenny didn't give a statement. She didn't need to, because Walter had come in the next morning at 7 a.m. as usual. Same booth, same black coffee, same calm eyes. Only this time, every seat around him was filled with people who remembered, people who respected, people who, without saying a word, let that young man know that honor still matters. And some things, even in the age of TikTok, are sacred. Walter didn't raise his voice, didn't curse or demand anything. He simply sat there, still as stone, dabbing gently at his pants with a thin paper napkin. The dampness from the coffee had begun to cool, but his calm demeanor never changed. That was who Walter was. Disciplined, composed, quiet in a way that commanded respect without ever asking for it. But Jenny was a different story. She stood behind the counter with her hands clenched into fists, her chest rising and falling in quick, angry breaths. Her eyes followed the door the boy had run through, still swinging slightly from his exit. Her lips trembled, not from fear but fury. He just did that and left, she muttered. Nobody answered. The other patrons were still stunned. Some were whispering. Others watched Walter with uncertain eyes, unsure whether to comfort him or simply give him space. Jenny didn't hesitate. She stormed to the window and peered through the glass. The boy was still visible, just a blur now, moving down Main Street with that same obnoxious swagger. Phone in one hand, hoodie bouncing with each step. She yanked out her phone, hands still shaking. She zoomed in and snapped a photo, his back, that ridiculous grin half turned toward the camera, the phone lifted high like a trophy. She didn't think twice. She opened her Facebook app, hit post, and typed, "Does anyone know this kid? He just knocked hot coffee on a Vietnam vet at Rosie's Diner while filming for TikTok. This is not okay. We need to hold him accountable." She hesitated for just a second, looking over at Walter. He gave a small nod as if to say, "Do what you need to do." She hit post. What she didn't expect was how fast it would spread. Within 20 minutes, the post had already gained over 100 shares. People from town, from nearby counties, even from other states started commenting. Some recognized the boy from the high school. Others tagged local parents and teachers. "Is this your student? Is this your son?" Unbelievable. By lunchtime, the post had been shared over 1,000 times. Local veterans groups picked it up. A retired Marine named Bill from just outside town shared it with a caption, "That man walked through hell in Vietnam, and this punk thinks he's a joke." By 2 p.m., Jenny's phone wouldn't stop buzzing. She turned the ringer off, but the screen kept lighting up with new comments, new shares, new private messages. Some were angry. Some offered to help identify the boy. A few even volunteered to buy Walter lunch every day from now on. And in the middle of it all, Walter just sat, back at his table. Coffee refreshed, pants still damp, but posture straight. He said very little. He simply nodded when strangers began entering the diner just to shake his hand. An older woman brought him a fresh slice of pie, cherry, warm, homemade. A young man in his 20s, with tattoos down both arms, took off his baseball cap and placed it gently on Walter's table. "I just want to say thank you," he whispered. Walter looked up, gave the young man a tired but genuine smile, and said, "You're welcome, son." The doorbell jingled constantly now. The diner filled faster than it ever had on a weekday, not with regulars, but with people who had seen the post, people who had never even been to Rosie's before. They came from nearby towns, small cities along the highway. Even a few out-of-state drivers passing through stopped after seeing the viral video. Jenny had to call in 2 more waitresses just to keep up. The mayor stopped by that afternoon. He wasn't there for a meal. He was there for Walter. He approached quietly, hat in hand, and introduced himself. "Sir," he said, "on behalf of this town, I want to personally apologize for what happened here today. And I promise you we're not letting it go." Walter, always polite, shook his hand and simply said, "Appreciated." The mayor nodded toward Jenny. "That post of yours might have just woken up half the state." Jenny shrugged. Someone had to say something. By evening, the story had gone national. News outlets picked up the video, the photo, and Jenny's post. Headlines like, "Teen pours coffee on veteran for TikTok." Town responds started popping up on social media. A local news van pulled up around 5 p.m. and asked for an interview. Jenny declined. Walter certainly did. But the message had already gotten out. And the boy, he couldn't hide. People found his name, his school, his parents. And while most didn't call for violence or cruelty, the pressure mounted fast. Comments flooded his own TikTok account. Thousands of people telling him he crossed a line, demanding he take responsibility. Some tried to defend him, saying he was just a kid, just trying to be funny, but most weren't having it. Because Walter wasn't just any man. He was a veteran, a pillar in the community, a quiet presence that reminded everyone of an older kind of dignity, one that didn't need to shout or demand respect, because it earned it every day without effort. Inside the diner, Jenny refilled Walter's coffee for the 3rd time. "You doing okay?" she asked, her voice softer now. Walter looked out the window, where a small group of veterans still stood on the sidewalk. Some smoking, some chatting, all watching. "I didn't expect all this," he said. Jenny smiled. "Neither did I. But people care, especially about you." Walter shook his head lightly. "The boy, he's young, foolish. But I hope someone teaches him better before it's too late." Jenny nodded. "I think today might have done just that." That night, After closing, she sat at the counter going through the comments again. Over 10,000 shares. Hundreds of messages. Several people offering to help cover Walter's meals for life. A local veterans nonprofit even reached out, asking if they could honor him at an upcoming event. But Jenny didn't care about the views. She only cared that people saw what mattered. That kindness still counted. That standing up for someone like Walter wasn't just the right thing to do. It was the only thing. And somewhere in a small bedroom on the edge of town, a teenage boy sat staring at a phone screen that refused to stop blinking. Thousands of people were reminding him of something he'd forgotten, or maybe never knew at all. That dignity isn't for clout. And mocking a man who once held a rifle so others could hold cameras in peace, that comes with consequences. 10 minutes. That's all it took. 10 minutes after Jenny posted the photo, after the image of the teenage boy went viral, after Walter's story traveled to the corners of town and far beyond. Things began to shift. A man in uniform pulled into the parking lot of Rosie's diner. He didn't say a word. He simply stood there, posture straight, hand behind his back, eyes fixed on the diner's front window, where Walter still sat. Not long after, a second man arrived, then a third. Within moments, 6 men, some in faded fatigues, others in crisp dress blues, stood outside the small-town diner, side by side. They didn't shout. They didn't raise signs or fists. They weren't there to intimidate. They came to stand with Walter, to form a silent wall of respect. A reminder that men like Walter were never truly alone. Inside, Jenny stood behind the counter, one hand pressed to her chest. Her heart thudded beneath her apron. Something sacred was happening out there. Something far beyond spilled coffee or teenage mischief. It was loyalty, timeless, unshaken. The kind forged in the mud and fire of wars long past. Then more cars began to stop. People stepped out, not all in uniform, but you could tell. The way they walked, the way they held their shoulders, looked straight ahead. They were soldiers, once and forever, even if their days of deployment were long behind them. In under 15 minutes, more than 20 veterans stood outside Rosie's diner. Walter was still inside, but he was no longer hunched over or wiping his pants. He had risen, slowly, with his silver cane in hand, shoulders pulled back, eyes focused. He picked up the old cap from the booth beside him, the one with his unit's emblem, threads worn from time, and placed it on his head. Jenny moved to open the door for him. She didn't say a word, just stepped aside with quiet reverence as Walter stepped outside, each footstep heavy with memory and quiet strength. And then the boy came back. He wasn't alone. 2 of the boys trailed him. Friends, no doubt, laughing under their breath as if the whole thing was still a joke. Maybe they thought they'd film a sequel. Another prank. Another moment of viral fame. But what they saw was not part of their script. As they turned the corner and caught sight of the 24 veterans, standing silent in the morning sun, the laughter died on their lips. The lead boy, the one from earlier, held his phone in hand, thumb hovering over the record button. His finger froze. He scanned a line of men, faces carved with age and experience. One man in a Marine dress uniform, another with a scar down his cheek, another with medals pinned to his chest, eyes steady as stone. And then he saw Walter. Walter wasn't seated now. He stood among his brothers, his comrades. The same man the boy had tried to mock now stood taller than ever, bolstered by decades of honor and the presence of those who understood the cost of freedom. The boy's hand trembled. And then, for the first time that morning, his phone slipped from his grip. It hit the pavement with a sharp crack, battery popping loose, screen spiderwebbing across the front. No one reached down to pick it up. No one said a word. Silence, thicker than any shout, fell over them. The kind of silence that weighed more than noise. The kind that made young men squirm and old men stand taller. The boy's friends took a small step back, unsure of what to do. One whispered, "We should leave." Walter took a step forward. Not quickly, not menacingly, just one step. He looked directly at the boy, his gaze calm, deep, like still water after a storm. "I'm not angry," Walter said, voice low but steady. "I just want you to understand your freedom, The phone you use, the voice you speak with, those things came at a price. Paid for in sweat, blood, and lives by men like us. The boy opened his mouth, but no sound came out. Walter didn't blink. Youth isn't an excuse for disrespect, but it is a chance to learn, if you have the courage. The boy looked down. His shoulders slumped, not in shame forced upon him, but in the dawning weight of understanding. He didn't say a word. No one needed him to. He turned, slowly, leaving the shattered phone on the pavement. His friends followed, silent now, heads lowered. No one clapped. No one cheered. This wasn't that kind of moment. Walter turned and walked back inside. The veterans began to disperse as quietly as they had come. No fanfare, no speeches, just a nod here, a handshake there. They hadn't come for attention. They'd come for a friend, for what was right, and in the stillness that followed, something remained, a presence, a story, a lesson, because some truths don't need to be shouted, and some videos don't need to go viral to leave a mark that lasts a lifetime. He didn't get arrested. No one laid a finger on him. In a world where anger often wins, where retaliation feels justified, something different happened that morning outside Rosie's diner. One of the younger veterans, maybe in his early 40s, walked over to the boy. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't scowl. He simply placed a firm, steady hand on the teen's shoulder, not as a threat, but as a man who had seen things most people couldn't imagine, a man who knew the value of restraint. He said quietly, "We fought for your right to be foolish, but just because you can doesn't mean you should." There was no applause, no crowd cheering, just a stillness that made the words echo louder than any shout. And Walter, he looked up from his seat with calm eyes. No anger, no bitterness, just a kind of quiet wisdom earned over decades. "You can sit with me tomorrow," he said. "First cup's on me." The boy didn't answer. He didn't nod, didn't apologize. He just stood there, caught in the wave of it all, then slowly turned and walked away, empty-handed, silent, thoughtful. The next day, before the sun had climbed too high, the diner's bell rang again. He came back, alone, no friends, no phone, no smirk, just a teenage boy with a different posture, a different look in his eyes, in his hands. He carried 2 cups of coffee. He walked straight to Walter's table by the window, set 1 cup down in front of the old man, then sat across from him, quietly. No cameras, no internet, no performance. Just 2 people, an old soldier and a young soul, sharing a moment that didn't need words. Walter smiled, a simple, knowing smile, the kind of smile that says, "This is enough." And somehow it was no lesson shouted, no punishment given, just a seat at the table and the start of something better. Respect doesn't come from likes, shares, or how many people follow you. It doesn't show up in a viral video or a trending hashtag. Real respect is quiet. It's steady. It's earned, not given. It grows in the spaces where you choose to listen instead of speak, where you sit with someone older, someone who's seen things you haven't, and instead of judging, you learn. That boy didn't walk back into Rosie's diner because someone made him. He came back because something shifted. Maybe it was Walter's calm. Maybe it was a wall of silent veterans. Or maybe it was just the first time in his life someone looked at him, not with hate, not with scorn, but with a strange kind of grace. He sat across from a man who had worn a uniform before his parents were even born. He brought 2 cups of coffee, not as an apology, but as an offering. And in that simple act, no words, no phone, no audience, there was something rare, something right. So here's a thought. Next time you see a veteran sitting alone at a diner, maybe nod your head. Better yet, offer to buy their coffee. You might not know their story. You might not understand their silence. But that one gesture, that small moment, it might say more than 1,000 TikToks ever could. Because sometimes kindness doesn't look like a big speech. Sometimes it's just showing up, sitting down, and sharing a quiet morning with someone who's carried more than you'll ever see. If the story moved you, if it reminded you of something deeper, consider subscribing to our channel. Here at Old Soldier Story, we share real voices. Stories about courage, about respect, and about the small things that still matter. Thanks for spending this time with us. And thank you, Walter, for reminding us what quiet dignity looks like.